Welcome back, everybody. This is GDS. I wanted to make this quick video today about taking feedback when you run the game. This video is not going to be a comprehensive guide on taking feedback or playtesting, just some common pain points that I have found that people sometimes don't do the best at when they take feedback. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and resolutions to those pain points that I identified, but if you want something that's a little more comprehensive, I'm going to include in the nonsense below a great guide specifically on tabletop RPG playtesting. It was written by Pesto Publications, not me, and it's completely free, so there's no reason to not check it out. And before we start this video, I want to see you go to the blah blah below and give us some of your best tips, tricks, advice for taking and incorporating feedback when you run the game. This can be new stuff that you just learned today as a new GM, or it can be stuff that you developed over years of experience running the game. Regardless of which case is true, this is a small channel. I don't get many comments. If you comment below, I'm going to see it and heart it and probably respond, so let's get a conversation going. Now to the video. Effectively giving and taking feedback can be difficult even if you're already experienced at running or playing games. That's because the former requires separate skills from the latter. So I have 4 main points, which are tips and also include common downfalls that people sometimes hit when they try to implement them. The first thing, and maybe the most important, is to make it clear that everyone in the table is working towards a common goal. That common goal is everybody having fun and feeling like they're a valued member of this community. This means that you should be intellectually humble and open to being wrong. Especially, you should be open to something that you strongly believe being wrong, or some mechanic or piece of design that you really love just not working out. And then when you do give or receive feedback on your design, especially when it's negative, be very clear about the intentions. Why are we all here? We are here to help each other by giving each other feedback. The reason we make this effort to give each other even negative feedback is because we care. Running a game, having a discussion on it, giving and receiving feedback is work. So it's important to recognize why we're willing to do this work. And in that regard, my final tip for number 1 is don't lose sight of the goal. The goal is to receive feedback and then do whatever you want with it. So if somebody gives you feedback that you disagree with, don't argue. Refuse that urge, even if you strongly disagree. This doesn't only make sure that you are being respectful to the people playing and testing your game, it also means that, again, you keep your sight on the goal and don't argue just because it feels righteous. The second tip I have on giving and receiving feedback is to ask yourself, what kind of feedback do you actually want? Implied in that is that you shouldn't just ask players, did you like it? Or did you have fun? Or did you enjoy it? Like we said before, the skills for playing and designing games are completely different from the skills of giving feedback. So, experienced players may not be experienced feedback givers. So instead of asking for broad feedback, tell people exactly the kind of feedback that you want to receive. Something important is when you do this, when you ask questions about something specific that you are curious about, don't ask the question in a leading way. Don't try to lead players towards a specific answer. You want to be careful and make sure that the feedback you get is as unbiased as possible. I think one good way to do this, especially if you're a beginner, is to ask yourself, what kind of things are you unsure about this session? Answer the question honestly, and at this stage, don't worry about being concise. It might go something like, well, I'm worried that combat dragged on for a little too long, but it's hard to tell from my point of view because I'm running all the bad guys. I also want to reward my players after combat, but I got the feeling that my players didn't love the reward I gave them, but they said that they did like it, so now I'm not sure. The last thing is, I wanted this encounter to feel like a scene from a Western, and I wonder if I achieved that. Then once you have this, translate this meditation into concrete questions. Make sure your questions ask for specific feedback that you're interested in, make sure you don't ask leading questions, and make sure your questions end with question marks. So here are a few examples from the example I just read. Did you like or dislike the length of combat? Did you like or dislike the rewards? I wanted this encounter to feel like a scene from a Western. Did you feel that? Once you ask those questions, let players say whatever it is they want. Even if they answer the specific question you asked them and then go off topic, write down their thoughts. They are valuable. The questions you asked might cause players to start thinking about certain aspects of the game, and they can come up with feedback answering questions you never asked. You want to make sure you capture this because this feedback too is valuable. One last thing is when you ask for feedback, and specifically when you communicate your intention about an encounter, don't pull back the screen too much. There's a balance to strike between asking for feedback and giving players a small peek behind the screen and removing the screen altogether such that players can't maintain their willing suspension of disbelief. In other words, the risk is that if you reveal too much about your intentions, players will start seeing how you construct the sessions, and then it will start feeling less like a world and more like stuff you made up. Which is true. It is stuff you made up, but players want to believe this is a real world where the players are real people. It is the willing suspension of disbelief. All you need to do is maintain it. Now on to my third tip on giving and taking feedback. This one is really important, and I see a lot of people get this one wrong. User error is design error. Let me explain. New designers sometimes dismiss some feedback as user error. For example, they had an issue because they did it wrong. They answer these problems which players describe with, well, why didn't you just do X? But it's important to understand that user errors are design errors. I'm going to read off my screen here for a second because I think this is important. Players doing or thinking stuff that's obviously wrong is very often a symptom of a problem with how you run, design, or communicate your game. When this happens, your job is to diagnose what made the player feel the way they did and why the players made the choices they did. Once you diagnose the core issue, you fix it. Players will often propose solutions to the symptoms they experience because they want to be creative and helpful. I always write down what players feel, but I almost never take their suggestions. Like I said, the user errors that players experience are very often symptoms of a larger problem. As the GM or designer, you have a far greater ability to diagnose problems than anyone else. I have an example here that I can read off my notes. Imagine after a combat session, a player says that combat was too hard. Enemies hit every time and they were hard to deal with. Then they suggest that maybe you reduce the damage that enemies do. But you know that combat was only hard because players chose to not use the grapple move. And if they used the grapple move, they could equalize the playing field. And enemies hit every time, and the outcome was predictable because the math of how the enemies hit you didn't have enough randomness. So some potential fixes you might come up with that are different from the player suggestions are maybe to better communicate the existence of the grapple move and when it's useful, and to reduce the enemy to hit bonus or increase the dice randomness for their attacks. The fact that as the GM or designer, you are much better equipped with diagnosing the problems players face is another reason to not argue with players. When you get feedback you disagree with, just listen, write down notes on what the players did and specifically how the players feel, and ask clarifying questions. Now the fourth tip, and the reason I put this almost last, I have 2 extra tips that I didn't tell you about, is because this one is actually on when to ignore certain feedback. Specifically, designing your game or session means that some people won't like it. Let me again read off my notes here. While we want to be intellectually humble and open to the possibility that our mechanics are suboptimal or counterpurposive, if you don't know what those words mean, I made, I think, a pretty good video explaining and breaking down what games are. What are mechanics? What are goals? What are fantasies? And in what ways mechanics can be bad. The link to that is going to be either here or here. I can honestly never remember. But while we want to be intellectually humble and open to the possibility that our mechanics are bad in those ways, We should also be aware that some people don't like mechanics due to personal preference. So when you gather negative feedback from a tester, keep in the back of your mind, what kind of games does the tester usually enjoy? How often do they play games? Do they not like the mechanic because of a specific choice you made using a strong opinion that you have on how games should be? Or because of something that you made a decision on but could change? What makes a game or session yours is that you create it with an authorial voice. The game or session you create represents some strong opinions that you have on the medium. Creating something with a point of view carries the potential of alienating those who disagree. People might not like what you create, and that's okay. Creative outcomes make people feel things, whether it is love, or indifference, or hate. If you are discouraged by all negative feedback and make something that nobody hates, with no authorial voice, that represents no opinion on anything, nobody will love it either, because there will be nothing there to love or hate. So I suppose the summary of the fourth point is to make things with a strong opinion or a strong authorial voice, a point of view, and when you do that, some people won't like it, and that's okay. Now I've got 2 extra points that I didn't tell you about. The first one is pretty quick. The 5th point is about in-session feedback. So watch the player's body language, tone, and specific feedback that they give you throughout the session. That can be valuable in determining, well, the answer to the questions that you ask feedback for. And then if something is really game-breaking in the session and you observe that, just adjust those game-breaking issues on the fly. And every time you do that, just quickly write down what the problem was and what the resolution was so you can come back to it later and fix it for good. The 6th and final point for this video is maybe a little more philosophical, but it's what the title of the video is about. And it's about the trade-offs of running a game. I will once again be a poor presenter and read off my notes here because I really want to get this right. As GMs, most of us don't have the luxury of playtesting our sessions before we run them. Even pre-designed modules were never tested with your table, your group of players, their player characters, and your style of running the game. This means that every session you run is part of an iterative process. The process of taking feedback is iterative. Any encounter or piece of game design is improved on the next time you run it. This means that every time you run a game, you are running the worst version of that game at that time. You may feel the urge to wait before you run for specific people you care about because you want them to experience the best version of your game, not the worst. At least a better version after a few iterations. My advice here is to just go for it. Our time is limited and the future is uncertain. If the planets have aligned, such that you have a willing group of friends and a runnable game, do it. Do it. As long as everybody is aligned on what you're running, which is the session you created 2 hours ago while eating cookies on the couch, and why everyone is here for you to run it, so everybody can have fun, then everything is okay. You may also feel self-conscious about your worst being bad. You may look at the stuff you worked on and think, this sucks. I can't believe my players enjoy this. As a creative person, you may find that you have a self-critiquing inner voice that is solely focused on the parts of your creations that suck. You also develop this voice, this taste, far before you develop skill, so you suck far before there's anything you can do about it. But importantly, it's this self-critical voice which makes you so painfully aware of which parts of your creations suck that drives you to be better. When he does that, listen. But when this voice tells you you need to stop creating because you suck, just don't listen. Be humble. Be willing to suck. Accept feedback from others. And be your own worst critic. That's just what being a GM is. That's just being an artist. If you made it this far into the video, I'm telling you now that this is it for the video. But before you leave, if you could please leave a like, smash your head into the screen, smash the like button an odd number of times. Let's do 15. Also, if you're not already subscribed, please press the subscribe button an odd number of times and make sure to hit the bell and comment. I can't tell you how much this stuff helps me because I honestly don't know. I don't think anybody does, but I hear it does help. So thanks again for watching the video. I hope you liked it and found it useful, and I'll see you later.